I've never been content with just knowledge. My life has always been characterized by a thirst for experience. I was learning the scriptures at record pace. I was in Bible college and working on Saturday mornings in the bus ministry for the church. There were many neighborhoods, and the church bus would drive through some on Sunday mornings, picking up children that I had solicited the day before. I was attending Bible studies, many home prayer meetings. I was hungry for all I could get of this God I'd met on the highway. The healing of Mikey under the tent put a fresh hope in me that the testimonies in the scriptures were true. I believe that God still knew men's hearts and that he healed men today. The power to live in his way was still open to me. I began to see that Jesus is the true messenger of God and indeed is the Son of God. I still did not understand the depths of his sacrifice for us, but I knew he was real. I realized that if I was going to experience on a practical level this God I had met, I had to pay attention to what his messenger was saying and do what he says. I saw that he had promised to speak to me and guide me in my daily affairs. I believed he had a specific purpose for me, and I could know and do his will. I especially saw that I had to believe that he was talking to me and showing me the truth. He told me to spend a day fasting and reading the Old Testament book of Nehemiah. I came to know that our time at the large Pentecostal church was coming to an end, and I had to resign from the bus ministry. In summer of 1977, I began fasting and praying and spending blocks of time alone and reading the scriptures. A local cemetery became my closet, a place I could go each morning where I would walk the roads, lay on the grass, and pray while I read the Bible. My business was no longer important to me, and we were being sustained by the rental income from our properties. I knew in my heart that our lifestyle was going to change, but I did not know to what extent. Throughout this time, I kept my wife well informed as to what I was learning and seeing. She could not know the depths of my own experience, but she did see the effect of Christ in my life. Looking back, I realized how pivotal that summer was for my life as well as the lives of my wife and sons. I met a couple of Christian brothers that seemed to want God as much as I did. They attended a Christian and Missionary Alliance church in Farmington Hills. So my wife and I began taking the boys to the meetings. It was a traditional church of great people who were hungry for God, to move in their midst with his power. They wanted the gifts of the Spirit to be active in the church meetings. They had not been active in me, and I didn't really understand them in that context. I was simply hungry for the reality of God. In my fasting and praying through the summer, I began to sense that God was telling me to sell off my investments, close my business, and follow him to where and what he would lead us. I told my wife that, and as we both fasted and prayed and cried, we were frightened. There were two sides to this coin. On one hand, we wanted to trust God, and we saw that he had what he had done with that original 12 disciples. He called them from their work. On the other hand, we didn't know anyone in modern times that had done this sort of thing. We were learning that God does not usually give us tomorrow's plan. We are told to walk one day at a time until we obeyed this one thing, there would be no light for beyond. We prayed and agreed with God. Within 3 weeks after the decision was made, 2 different investors entered my office to talk with me about buying rental property. Selling property rental property was not part of my business. I only bought for my personal needs to rent and maintain for income. I had not advertised my properties for sale. One was a friend of a real estate associate, and the other had called me on a for sale advertisement that I previously placed for a listing that I had. One of them bought 3 of my homes, and the other, unrelated to the first buyer, bought the other 12. I was out of the rental business, just like that, 3 weeks. Well, we were making a clean sweep of it. Our home in Southfield, Michigan was on the market as well. I didn't know where the Lord would lead us. Therefore, I felt a need to be free of everything that had foundations to it. A family in the church that we had met heard about our house for sale and made arrangements to buy it. And we closed on the deal. In October of 1977, we owned nothing and had to move. We didn't know just how our lives would be characterized by our moving from place to place. Right? My wife had no idea about that. My wife is a wonderful homemaker. She could make a house a home within 24 hours of entry. She had pictures on the wall, dinner on the table, whether it's a piano crate or a palace, and we have lived in both. Looking back, I realized that our way was hidden from us. We lived day to day and watched as God provided everything we needed. In my heart, I was living out and beyond from where we are at any given moment. Living day to day was a discipline that God was exercising, not me. I had dreams and visions that I wanted to see fulfilled. I had yet to learn that God did not want or need my dreams, visions, and labor. He wanted me and my family for himself. His working in our lives was to show us that he loved us and was more than able to provide for our needs and lead us in the path he had chosen for us. But I, of course, was strong-willed and aggressive, and I did not yet know that I could not force God's hand. We rented a small house in Farmington Hills in an area that I didn't even want to sell homes in, let alone live in. But God was there. The five of us, my wife and three sons and I, sat on the floor in the living room where I prayed, "Okay, God, we have done what you want. What now?" He simply said to follow him. Our three sons transferred to the local school system, and we settled into life in that house. The fellowship with the people that we knew at the church was sweet, and they watched. It's interesting, we can watch other people serve God like that. They watched as we trusted God to meet our needs, like he meets the needs of the birds of the air or the flowers of the field. Let me remember for you an experience that while we lived at that address that's never ceased to thrill me. We had two cars. I had my Cadillac and my wife's Oldsmobile. They were leftovers from our life in business. It was a snowy morning, adding a fresh layer to the 4 or 5 inches that were already on the ground. I stepped out the back door to the driveway and noticed that 2 tires on the Cadillac were flat. The Oldsmobile had no gas in the tank, and I had less than $1 in my pocket. I don't remember where I wanted to go. We had no other cash. I returned to the kitchen to drink a cup of coffee and think and meditate before the Lord. I have since learned that he often speaks to me in that mode. I went back outside to the car and opened the trunk to see how the situation sat for a spare. It was flat. As I stood there, I looked over the top of the raised trunk lid and spotted a steak truck on the back side of a parking lot behind our house that belonged to the party store that was kitty corner from us on the main road. The Holy Spirit spoke to me. There is an air compressor on that truck. I also saw a man walking across the parking lot towards the truck. I stepped away from the car and began moving towards the truck, planning to meet him in front of his vehicle. As I approached him, I greeted him and asked if he had an air compressor on his truck, which he confirmed that he did. I told him about my tires and he immediately drove the truck to my driveway, aired up the tires. One was simply flat, and he repaired the one that had a hole in it. He told me that he worked for a trucking company and stayed on the road servicing the company's trucks. I asked him if I could pay him. What a stupid question. I had no money. He refused, said, no, he had a busy day. I thanked him, and as he drove away, I just considered the entire event, marveling at my God and the security that was mine. Why were those tires flat? There was no reason for it. It was not uncommon to find a bag of groceries on the back stoop of the house or a $20 bill in my Bible. Once, after such provision, Linda cooked, my wife, cooked a very small corned beef, about the size of a coffee cup. The 5 of us ate it for dinner, wrapped up the leftovers, and ate it again the next evening. I remember us being invited to an after-church birthday lunch that a widow had planned for her son. It was to be a private affair with just a few guests, and we were invited. When we arrived, the small apartment was filled with uninvited guests. The table was sparsely prepared with a small lunch, and the lady came to me. She was upset and embarrassed at the little food that was available for so many people. She asked me to pray for the luncheon. I lifted my voice in thanksgiving for the food and blessed it before the Lord. Everyone ate their fill, and the widow stored the remains for later snacks. He was proving to me that he had provision for every situation. It's been almost 45 years. And I'm telling you, there's been provision for every situation. There was a lady in the church, Mary Jo Kopechne, I think. Anyway, by name, in the church that we had been attending, who was married and had a young child. She also had cancer. She was bedridden. My wife had been taking a turn in caring for her and her baby, making dinner, cleaning the house, etc. Her troubles were a concern to most of the church. Many of us had prayed for her, comforting her and her husband, and believing for her healing. My wife and I received word that she was back in the hospital, and the elders of the church had anointed her with oil at the hospital and prayed again for her healing. We knelt before the Lord in our living room to ask his counsel about Mary Jo. He said very clearly to both of us that he was going to take her home with him. We asked we asked him to do so speedily and cut her suffering. We also prayed for the comfort of her husband and baby. The next day, she was gone. The experience was a continuing confirmation to us that God wanted to bring us in on his plans if we would but ask, that his voice was readily available to us if we would believe and go with him. Well, during this time, I became involved with a man in the church and helped him begin a prison ministry that was started to serve two young men whose parents were a part of the church. So for about 6 months, I traveled 2 hours one way to a I think it was a maximum security prison, every Saturday evening with 3 or 4 other men to preach and pray with the inmates. I stopped participating in the ministry, but it continued through the other men. I didn't know at that time that my life would be one of assignments and that nothing would be long term. The only track I had to run on was what God said at any given day. This was kind of difficult for my wife, if you can imagine. A nester, that's how they are. I had started a small window washing route in the late fall of 1977. I built it into about 8 days a month. The revenue provided enough money to pay either our rent or the utilities and a little food. I worked through the cold winter and in early spring. When the job was going to get easy, the Lord asked me what I was doing. I didn't answer, but I knew what he was talking about. He told me to give the business away to the window washer who taught me how to solicit and price the jobs. Of course, I told him why I was giving it to him, that it was a gift from God to him. He just looked at me with a nervous smile. Starting that business to meet my own needs would be only the first time since I began to follow his will that I was embarrassed at my own unbelief and disobedience. Fear and unbelief are very strong motivators in all of us. Our tenure in that house was to come to an end in the May of 1978. It had been a part of learning that following Jesus was not a matter of learning concepts and precepts and things. It's about learning his voice and the promptings in our spirit and experiencing his faithfulness so that we can obey his lead with confidence, because another adventure was waiting for us. It's so easy to think that we got to learn the Bible. Got to learn to read and know what the Bible says. That's a testimony. It's there to help us experience God, walk with God, and do what's being written in the Bible, not just know it and understand it. Okay? Well, God bless you. That was chapter 23, I think.